In this lecture, you're going to learn about two important array methods to loop over arrays. So that's the forEach method and the map method. Now, looping over an array basically means to perform a certain action for each of the array elements. And the most basic method that we have for doing so is the forEach method. So that's a nice name for each array item, right? So that's an easy one to remember. Let's just clean up a little bit here. First, maybe. Okay. Just so you can always see the values here in the console. And by the way, the code for the previous object lecture is not here because by mistake, I recorded this lecture in the wrong order. So when you're writing your own code, you will of course see the code from the previous lecture, which was about objects. Okay, so let's create a very basic array here just with a few numbers. Okay, so this is a completely valid array, of course. And now on this array, we can call forEach. So for each of these values, so for 2, for 4, for 6, and for 8, we want something to happen. But what do we actually want to happen for each of them? Well, that's where we need to specify a function. So we need to give this function here another function, which is something that we never did before. So this is an idea that we do actually all the time in JavaScript, and now it's the first time that you are encountering it. So again, we now need to pass a function into this function, and we can create that function here on the fly. So basically, we can create it here immediately. So we write a function, and this function will be called by JavaScript automatically for each of the array items. And JavaScript will then pass the array item into the function. And so here we need to accept that value. And we can call it anywhere we want. We can call it X, can call it Y, or we can simply call it EL, which is short for element. Okay, and now here we want to do something. Let's just log the element to the console. So just the most basic operation here. And here we go. So we have 4 different console logs. And these 4 are exactly these 4 values, one printed after the other. So we successfully looped over the array using the forEach method. And so let's recap what happened here. So we passed in this function here, and JavaScript will then automatically call this function for each of these elements. And when it does so, it will pass the current value into this function. So the function is first called with 2, and so then element is 2. And so then we log 2 to the console. Then in the next round, element will be 4. And so then 4 is logged to the console, and so all the way until the end of the array. So this is what we call looping. And I think this method here is the best one to understand this concept. But in practice, it is actually not the most used one. Because in practice, many times we want to create new arrays based on an original array. So for example, let's say we wanted a new array based on this one, where all these 4 elements were multiplied by 10. So that would be 20, 40, 60, and 80. With this forEach method, we could in theory do that, but not in an ideal way. And so in a case like this, we always use another method, which is the map method. So let me show you what I mean here. So I will again use the same array. And so now instead of forEach, we use map. And now the idea is the same as before. So we specify the function, and in each iteration of the array, the function will get called with the current array element. Okay, and so now in the map method, what we need to do is to return something. So what we're going to do is to return the current element times 10. And so this returned value here, so in this case here, 20, 40, 60, and 80 is what will be placed in the new array. So the result of calling this will be a brand new array. So we didn't log anything to the console this time because this returned something, so a new array. So we need to store that somewhere. Let's call it times 10, like this. And then let's log that whole array to the console. So not one by one, but all at one. And so indeed, we get just what I had predicted. So 20, 40, 60, and 80, which is the result of taking each of these and multiplying it by 10. And this works just amazing. However, we can do better using the knowledge that we got a few lectures back. And that is using the arrow function. So by using the arrow function, we can make this here a lot more elegant. So a lot more shorter. So let me copy it and then comment out this part by using command or control slash. So that will comment everything, copy it here, and then let's write a new function. And this time an arrow function. And then you will see why the arrow function is so helpful. So remember that the arrow function does not need the function keyword. All we do is to specify the input, which is element, then the arrow, and then what we want to return. And that is simply L times 10. And so here is where the arrow functions really shine. So this is what arrow functions were really made for. It's for situations like this, where we need to pass one new function like this into another function, like the map function. So here we have the entire function in this very short and concise way, where it really doesn't get into the way, like this whole code block here. So this is a lot nicer and more elegant. Okay, but now let's do something a bit more meaningful here. And for that, I will get now, or actually it's not here, it is in the data.js. So let's move to data.js and grab this array. So now you know what an array is. So now we can grab this, copy it, and close the sidebar, close this file. And I'm going to paste it right here. Let me comment out this for each, so we have a bit less noise in the console. Okay, because now, of course, we can loop over this array as well. So here we have an array of objects, which is something new. So before here, we only had arrays with simple values. So it's strings, numbers, booleans, and so on. But in JavaScript, it's actually very common to have arrays like this. So arrays containing multiple objects. And so let's now do something simple here with this array using the map method. So let's say that in our application, we need an array which contains only these names. So something very simple, only containing these 8 strings here. So let's create an array called all categories, like this. So let's take categories and loop over it using map. And we're using map because we want to create a new array based on an original array. So that's this one here in this case. And let's immediately use the arrow function. As always, I will call it simply element. And then all we want to return is, well, the current element dot name. So element dot name, and then let's check that out. And indeed, here it is. So an array containing these 8 strings. And it works like this because now, as we're looping over this array, each element is always one object like this, right? So this object here in each iteration of the loop is called L. So we can do just like we learned in the previous lecture, dot and then the property name, which in this case is name. Of course, we could also do color. And then we would get an array of all the colors. But here we are interested in the category names. So again, this is something that we do quite often. Finally, let's actually go back another time to our data here, and let's also get these initial facts. And if you take a close look at these initial facts, you will see that again, they are an array of objects. So array, and in there, 3 objects. And as you see, each of them has the created_in property. And so what I want to do now is to create an array which simply contains the 3 ages of these 3 facts. So const fact ages. So that's initial facts. And once more, we are interested in creating a new array based on the original, which has the same length. So this one has the length of 3, as there are 3 elements. And so the new one will also have 3 elements. So then map is exactly what we need. And as always, let's create an arrow function. And so then, what do we want to return this time for each of the elements? Well, we want to calculate the age, right? So the age for this fact. And hopefully you remember that we already created a function for that. And so in here, we can call that function. I think we commented out that function though. So let me get it back. And here it is. It doesn't really matter which one we use. So let me copy this one. So we don't always need to use arrow functions. They're really mostly helpful in a situation like this. So what we want to return for each element of the array is calc fact age with the current element dot created in. So that's starting to become a bit more advanced, but just roll with it, and I will explain in a second. So fact ages, and down here we have it, 1, 2, or 1, 3, and 7. And of course, if we change this to something else, something huge from the future, then the third one would be impossible year. So just what we get from here. So what is happening here? As always, we loop over the array, and then this function is called for each of the elements. So we take the current element and retrieve the created_in property from it. So for example, in this last one, that's 2015. And then we call the calc fact age function. So with that value, and so that will then return the age. So 7 in that case. And so since that's the return value from the function, it will be placed in the array at that position. And that's how we get 7 in that array. And we could do other stuff. Let me quickly show you just another method here just for fun. So we could do fact ages and then dot join. And so dot join will create a string out of the array. So here we need to specify a separator. So it doesn't really matter here. We can do percentage, we can do, let's do just this. And so what's going to happen is that it will create a string with this separator here between the string elements. So we could also do like this, for example, or really whatever we wanted. So this is sometimes helpful as well, but yeah, there are so many helpful methods and I will not tell you about all of them here. Again, this is just a crash course, but this map method here is going to be extremely important later on. So in this section and in the next one. So we use this in React all the time, which is why I really needed to show you this here in this crash course.